Okay, I'm Lori, as Kathy introduced me earlier, and I just want to say that the topic for today it's a difficult one, but we wanted to approach it from this angle of surviving suicide, the ones left behind. We're going to have three different speakers. First will be Donna Fox, then Dana Flattery, and then Deb Jorgensen. We'll go ahead and let Rose introduce Donna.
Thank you, Lori. Donna Fox. I met Donna several years ago through the Mental Health Coalition Verde Valley. And this happens to be one of the programs that Nami has taken over from the Mental Health Coalition. Donna has spent over 25 years working and volunteering in the areas of mental health, suicide prevention, and postvention. She volunteered for 7 years at Crisis Connection, Minnesota's suicide hotline. And while she was there, she served as a crisis counselor, public speaker, and executive member of the board of directors. She was also the director of training and development for the Minnesota CIT Officers Association. And she ended her career as the program director of Nami, Minnesota. Her father's suicide when she was a child gave her a passion for helping others. Donna retired with her husband to Sedona in 2017, where she now leads a monthly survivors of suicide support group for suicide loss survivors. So thank you for everything you do, Donna. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rose. As Rose said, I lost my father to suicide. He died when I was a child. So that leaves me a suicide loss survivor for the vast majority of my life. And now in retirement, as Rose mentioned, I lead the support group in Sedona for SOS, Survivors of Suicide. And we meet the last Tuesday of every month from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 5:30. And that is at Christ Lutheran Church in Sedona. It's 25 Chapel Road. And we've been a little bit slow to get started again since our big break with COVID. So if you help spread the word, that would be wonderful that we are back meeting in person. We've changed the time. It's still the last Tuesday of the month, but now we start at 4 o'clock sharp and go till 5:30. So the reason I continue to do this and really gain from it myself also, because anytime you volunteer that you're helping others, you're helping yourself. So I continue to lead this group. I now have a co-facilitator, Terry. So together we lead the group because this is a unique grief. It is intense. It's unique. It brings up a lot of feelings that aren't always associated with other forms of grief. While there are other grief support groups, you can find them at hospitals, you can find them at mortuaries sometimes. There will be bereavement groups, and that's wonderful. Sometimes though, for a suicide loss survivor, it's hard to walk into those groups. We're just viewed a little differently, and it helps to be in a room with other loss survivors. We've experienced much the same, and there's a different level of understanding, I believe, in our group. And it just helps for us to share with each other where we're at on our path. Again, I'm far down the road, being, many decades with this, and we get people who are very, very new to their grief, and we all work together to help each other. It's confidential. It's a safe place to share our feelings honestly. One thing with suicide loss, there can be intense anger. There is intense grief, certainly, confusion, questions, feelings of abandonment, and all that can be shared in our group without judgment. There's no judgment. There's no comparison. someone's situation being better or worse than anyone else's. It's really a very, very understanding group. Strictly for those who have lost a loved one to suicide, not a group for attempt survivors. There are other groups for that. I would refer you to Nami. Nami has wonderful connections groups, and Nami's just a wonderful resource for all of us. But for anyone who's lost someone to suicide, please come and meet others who have experienced the same type of loss. And if it's too hard to talk about it, just come and sit in with us. Just sit with us. And you can say pass. You don't have to say a word. Sometimes it's all you can do to walk in the door, and that's okay. That's okay. You might hear just a nugget that you can take away that will help you with something that is really bothering you, that you're really dealing with presently, and can get you through maybe until our next meeting. And whenever you want to start talking, fine also. What really helps us there is to talk about what we experienced, what helped and what didn't help. And we learn from each other in that way. I'll give an example. It was a certain age I reached, it was probably in my late 20s, where I just decided I wasn't going to avoid the question anymore of how my father died. I was going to say the word. And that was hard to do, especially the first time. And I used to avoid the subject. I used to make up stories. I just didn't want to talk about it with acquaintances and, a close friend, fine, but people you work with, not always. So the first time I did it, someone asked how my father died. I said he died by suicide. And he was startled by my answer. And he said, "I'm surprised you said it just like that." And I said, "I'm surprised you asked me that question without expecting an honest answer." And that was the first time I felt not devastated by the conversation. And it felt, I can't say it felt good, but it certainly felt better than how I used to handle it. And those are the kind of things we share in our group and help people to get to a point where they'll have some things in their back pocket for when uncomfortable questions come up, or questions of means. People will say, "How did your loved one do it?" You don't have to answer that. We learn along the way. We don't have to. I just say I don't talk about that. And in our group, we don't focus on means or details of the death either. We focus on that they're gone. That's the main thing. They're gone. And how are we going to move forward? The means isn't important. So eventually you get to a point where you want to remember them for how they lived and not how they died. You want to remember that when things were better, they loved gardening. They might have loved to cook. They loved the holidays, whatever it is. Those are the memories that you want to share with each other, not the memories of how they died. So you do get to that point eventually. So if you are a loss survivor yourself, or if you know someone who is, again, please help share that our group does meet. There are other SOS groups also. If you go to the Impact SOS website, and that's EMPACTSOS.org, and click on support groups, you'll see that there's a group in, let's see, there's several groups in Phoenix, but there's also one in Prescott, and then our group in Sedona. So please help us spread the word. Our numbers have been low since coming back. So, and we know that the need is out there. There are people who would like to know about it. So please help us. Thank you.
And thank you, Donna, so much for sharing that. What a magnificent group. And we'll move ahead and have Kathy introduce Dana.
So our next speaker is Dana Flattery, who I've had the pleasure of knowing with and working with intimately for 10, 12, 15 years, a long time. She currently serves as the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System in two senior roles, two different level of capacities. Senior policy advisor to the director and the Assistant Director of the Division of Community Advocacy and Intergovernmental Relations. Dana is a survivor of suicide who brings more than 17 years of experience in the behavioral health field, 10 of which have been with the state of Arizona. During that time, she's become a leader in public health policy for a wide variety of populations. With colleagues, she helped develop the Arizona Peer Advancement Career Academy, as well as several advocacy training courses, led stakeholder engagement for major agency initiatives, and assisted in health policy development that had a direct impact on its members. That was difficult, Dana. Welcome.
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, I've had the pleasure of working with Kathy for over a decade, and it's been a wonderful ride. And so thank you for inviting me here today, because Kathy knows a bit of my journey, and she was there as a intense support for me during a couple of my losses. So I kind of have had a loss journey. And so my first loss was in my final year of college. My good friend ended his life. And at that time, that was a shock to me and my system. I did not have any familiarity with the concept of death by suicide. And shortly after that, our other good friend, we were really good friends through high school and college, began his struggle with multiple attempts. And so I dove into behavioral health, both hands, and really was able to work in the field and learn a lot in order to help him navigate the system for the next couple of decades. So I spent half my life helping him navigate the system as his advocate, and navigating his path towards staying here. Unfortunately, this last year we lost him to COVID. And so that was my friend journey of loss. And then in 2015, I lost my baby brother. And then in 2018, I lost my oldest brother. And so I have had a intense journey, and I apologize. This is also my first time speaking publicly about this. And so Kathy, I'm glad I'm doing it with you, as you've been such a support over the years as I've gone through these multiple losses. And so I'm coming up on anniversary time, which is a bit harder time of year for me, as both my brothers were lost in October and November. And so it has been a intense journey, but I have had a lot of amazing support. Working in behavioral health, I think all of us know that we're all here for a certain reason. There's something about our story. There's something about who we are. There's something about where we came from that lends for us to want to give back and help where we can. And maybe there are some places that we feel like we couldn't help enough, but that just allows us to pivot somewhere else and help somewhere else. And so I'm very grateful for the work that I get to do. I was blessed with working in the advocacy department during my first loss. And so just diving into that work intensely was incredibly helpful. I also, as Donna mentioned, took advantage of a lot of the loss supports. So I was very lucky to have loss teams on the scene of both of my losses. And I knew the book well by the second time it was handed to me. And I knew what to do. As a person that has spent a large part of my career helping people navigate the system, it was interesting to be one navigating it. And so I really just tried to tell myself what I would tell another person. You need to try this group. You need to try individual. You need to see what you can do for the rest of your family member, but know that everyone's going to have their own journey. All you need to do is show up for yourself, and that's it. And sometimes that just looks like self-care at home. Sometimes that looks like enjoying your family. And sometimes it does look a little bit harder, like some of maybe the more difficult therapies to go through, and whatever that may be for each individual journey. But I did that. I showed up for myself, and it was definitely worth it. And so I also feel that having a huge group, I have a wonderful team at work. I've been able to work with most of them for a decade. And so a large majority of them have literally been at the funerals of both of my brothers, and I get to look at them every day at work and have that same support, that same face showing up. And so if I have a harder day, it's very easy to lean on them, and likewise them to me if they're having a hard day. And so I do want to take a moment to shout out to, I think I had probably the best work agency that anyone could have to go through such a loss, for the understanding that I had in the workplace. My surviving brother works in sales, and he did not have that same experience. He was expected to go back right away and just move forward. And so I definitely took advantage and was very, very grateful of all the love and support that I had from those around me. But as far as those nuggets that I got from group that Donna mentioned, a nugget is really celebrating the best parts of them. And so for years after my first brother's loss, I would do this big celebration on the day that they went to heaven to try and get everyone together and see familiar faces. And after a while, I thought, well, this is kind of hard because it's remembering the worst day. And so I asked for everyone to submit memories, the best or the funniest memory they had with them. And I made this wonderful video, and I found a video of him laughing while sailing, and was able to put it all together to something to send out to people as that's what you can remember if you want to reflect this year. You can remember how wonderful and amazing he was and hilarious. And that's what we can do. And so since then, I use those anniversaries to really dive into life, to do what they would have wanted to do with me if they were there that day. And I'm looking forward to the adventures. I will be spending my first anniversary this week coming up with my kids on the beach. We have wetsuits because it will be very cold, but we will be doing the things that they loved in life. And so I do not wish this journey on anyone, but I'm very, very grateful that I had other people that had a journey to walk beside when I was on mine, and I'm still on mine. So very grateful for all the survivors out there that lend their support through those groups and through their stories and through sharing what is helpful.
Thank you, Dana, so much. And with that, we'll move ahead and have Kathy introduce Deb Jorgensen.
So I've kind of got a difficult job. I just want to share that. I've known Dana and I've known Deb for a long time and kind of been there with both of the journeys. I feel very emotional right now, but anyway, I want to introduce Deb Jorgensen, who's been a longtime friend. She is a peer and manager of the Individual and Family Affairs for Care First Plan, Arizona. Before coming to Care First, Deb wore many hats as a member of the executive leadership of 2 peer-run and family-run organizations, a dynamic administrator and trainer with lived experience who can identify and support strengths and growth in others within an organization during collaborative efforts with community builders and on an individual or group level. She believes in social justice and strives to affect positive, integrated, and sustainable changes in the stakeholder empowerment, education, and advocacy. And I would also like to share that I have a number of paintings in my house, as does Deb up on the walls, that were done by her brother. So I'm going to turn this over to Deb.
Hi, everybody. Like Dana shared, this is the first time that I'm actually ever spoke about this in public, and the paintings that Kathy alluded to, and my brother died in 2010, and the coroner wanted to label it a suicide because he felt that the way that my brother died was too embarrassing for the family, and I was the only family left, and I challenged him because he died accidentally. It was autoerotic asphyxiation, and he had not been well. So there just were a number of things that added up, but it wasn't a suicide. And I said to the medical examiner, why would I want to think that he died alone and hopeless and not accidentally, and in the course of whatever he was doing, there was so much. It spoke a lot about how much shame can be pillowed into that experience. And I think that's important to remember through all of this, because that was my experience. In 2008, I did become a survivor of suicide, and it was a Monday morning. I was on the way to week 2 of training, having been hired as a case manager for an adult behavioral health clinic. And as I was driving there was something that just kind of snapped in my chest, and I started panicking. And it's something I kind of struggle with on a regular basis. But something was different. And I strongly felt that I shouldn't be alone. And so that was new. I kind of said, okay, I'll honor whatever the universe is telling me. And instead of going to training, I drove on by my exit, went to my girlfriend's house, and called in sick. And after a while sitting with her, the panic kind of subsided. I decided to go to Starbucks because she was in her pajamas. I was getting back in the coffee into the car when I got the call that my friend and former partner Elude had killed himself. And I was there with a friend to process this, and that was incredibly helpful at the time. There were stages that happened with this. I was grieving, I was angry. We were both part of a 12-step community. So his relapse, there were some judgmental people about that. And I was really angry, and they weren't really a fan of his being in my life at all, because I was clean and it was chaotic, and understandable why they felt that way. I was just so, I was just angry, and I was sad. And part of what helped was supporting, being able to support his children, his adult children during this time. But what happened after, with the circumstances of his suicide, his actions on that day were monstrous, basically. And I turned it all inward. Like, how could I have ever loved someone who could do what he did that day? And I had a hard time wrestling with that for a while, how I couldn't reconcile that horrible day with the person that I knew, over the course of 5-6 years. So that kind of pushed me to start looking at why, because I didn't understand the why. And I have one slide that I brought, and it's just one slide, but this is how I made sense of the why. I came across Thomas Joyner's theory of suicide, and he was someone who had grappled with the death of his own father, and had come with this theory that made so much sense to me. And how it worked for me was that I could see, the capability for suicide, not being afraid to die. Elude was a Marine and an addict. And if you talk to most addicts, we're not really afraid to die. So, and coupled with his Marine background, that wasn't a fear that he ever really entertained. And then the second piece was the thwarted belongingness, and he moved from Arizona to Texas because he felt really alone in his Arizona relationships. And in active addiction, you find yourself alone no matter where you are. And his move to Texas really didn't relieve any of the loneliness. And the third part, where if you hit all three, you're in that sweet spot of suicides, is the perceived burdensomeness. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Ugh. A great deal of his self-worth was determined by employment and self-reliance, and this new job was supposed to be a sure thing through a family connection. And the morning of his suicide, he thought the HR meeting was just a formality for paperwork. When he was asked to take a drug test he couldn't pass, it was his last straw, and he snapped, and he ended up, attempting suicide by cop. And when they wouldn't shoot, he turned the gun on himself, and he committed suicide. So that was the day and the call that I got, and that how Joyner's work really resonated with me. And I could, I saw that as I looked, I saw that in patterns with other individuals, when I'm working in the clinic and different things like that. But it really helped me get balance back about understanding also how that day didn't define that person, and celebrating who that person was in my life and in many other people's lives. He was very inspirational to a lot of other people's lives, and had worked in recovery and making recovery happen for others for years. And it was rough. It was rough at first trying to shift those two, but I got there. And part of it was weird things that would happen that kind of led to the acceptance and moving on. The spiritual healing was really important. He visited me once in my dreams, and the radio would turn on and off at different times, like just by itself, and songs that, we'd listen to together and things like that. And, so I would think about what was accomplished together. I wrote gratitude lists. They were really important. And I did a workshop called Spark of Life that was a weekend workshop to grieve and honor the individual that you had lost, no matter what the kind of loss was. And it was put on by some very Christian people, but they didn't push religion on anyone. And it was a very healing experience. So that helped. And this experience really shapes my work even to today. When I was at the clinic working with teams and suicidal members, I'd get kind of called and sent out to work with these individuals. And then when I was at Ren, we started a survivor group. I was really proud of that work. And it's threaded throughout my work in recovery and behavioral health since it happened. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deb and Donna and Dana, for sharing. And I'm going to open this up for questions and comments. And one of the comments was, what do the presenters think needs to be done to get more men to participate, to open and heal their hearts?
I am happy to take a stab at that, if you'd like.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, so I've lost two brothers, and I still have a remaining brother, and I will tell you that his journey has been quite a bit different from mine. It took him a long time to even want to talk about it, to even connect with our family talking about it, let alone other individuals. And so I do think that there is a feeling of increased stigma or just the feelings that come along with it that are a little bit more difficult for male survivors. In the case of my family, my father will not talk about it with anyone. And so it's just different. But I will say I'm incredibly proud of my brother. He has just recently, this last year, started talking about it, and he's in a very different world professionally. So, you know, he's in that sales world, and it's not every day that you have this topic, and he is starting to still share his voice and expose that other world that maybe doesn't have this topic on the agenda daily or weekly, to what that's like, and normalizing the loss, and then also talking about prevention. But I do think it's harder to get there. In my group experience, I will say that there were quite a few males in my actual group that I will never forget their words for the rest of my life. They were so helpful and healing and very candid. But there were definitely less men than women in the room throughout that.
Thank you, Dana, for sharing that. Would either of the other panel presenters like to comment on that before we move on to something else?
Well, I would concur with Dana. I have more women coming to the group than men, a handful of men who are regulars. It's so wonderful when they do come, because they don't, I'm generalizing a bit here, of course, but generally they don't say as much, but when they do, it's really, really helpful and really, really important, and especially helps the other men in the room. So I thoroughly encourage men to attend these kind of groups and to feel comfortable doing so. You may be surprised that you're not the only man in the room, and you can help each other a lot. And I appreciate when they come.
Thank you, Donna. Deb, would you like to add anything to that?
What I've found is that men who have experienced the suicide of a loved one seem to be more comfortable speaking one-on-one than being in a group, in my limited experience. So I think that that may contribute to that reticence and just, you know, macho stuff. Feelings, yuck.
Thanks, Deb. And I'm going to invite John Schuterer to comment on this too, because John, you've done a lot over the years with leading on all of this and groups.
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for bringing me into this conversation. I was the one that asked the question because I was thinking back. I'm a suicide loss survivor as well. I lost my youngest son in 2001, and I was in the mental health field at that time, so I had plenty of support around me all the time. But so I'm not aware whether or not there were groups available at that time. I don't recall that there were. So SOS and other groups are just phenomenal that they're helping people get through this, because the work you're doing is really what we call post-vention work. It's what happens with the people after a crisis or an incident such as this. So what do we do with them? And you're a big part of that. The other little phrase that I've come up with is that a good post-vention is a good prevention, because we also know that often a suicide will beget other suicides, and for various reasons. So when we can sit down and talk about it, it's just phenomenal. So I think I like the comment about men might prefer one-on-one, but I would say that might be even difficult because we don't know who's lost someone to love or a loved one to suicide unless we're really close. I'm also involved with just a men's group in general, connected through our church, and that's been tremendously supportive. They know what I've been through, and when you get to know each other that well, then you share deeply, and then you can connect with folks. So Obviously, stigma is a big thing. And I think in our, like with our first responders, law enforcement, those kinds of groups, they've got a big stigma in that they don't want to be perceived as weak. They want to make sure that the people that they work with can depend and count on them. So it is a big hurdle, but every once in a while, a crack opens up as an opportunity for us to get in there and ask some questions about, hey, have you lost someone? Are you thinking about harming yourself? Those kinds of things. So I want to thank all the presenters and Nami group here for presenting this. This is phenomenal. Need to have more public conversations about it. So I think it was Dana and Deb said this is the first time they've shared publicly. I know that's a huge step. So I honor you for taking that big, brave leap off the edge of a cliff. I know that's what it feels like. Each one gets a little bit easier, not always. There's always emotions connected to that sharing as well, and that's to be expected. So thank you all for this presentation. Excuse me.
Thank you, John. And I know, Ralph, you had your hand up. Go ahead, Ralph.
Yes, I'd just like to jump in with a couple of comments. Being part of the minority group in this conversation, there's less men on this group than there are women, I see. And I'd like to thank all three presenters. I thought all three did a good job on explaining what they went through and how they approached it, etc. When I lost one of my three sons in 2013 at 48 years old, I was fortunate in that one of the assistant pastors at Valley Presbyterian, where I was attending at the time, had just brought Nami into the picture there. I knew nothing about Nami before that. And as a part of it, the Stephen ministers also had a grief share program going, which is a faith-based workbook video type program, which I found to be extremely helpful. And we have grief share, for example, here on the mountain right now. I was pleased to see that in the work that I do with Nami. Of course, we come across people who have lost people. So I think, and I have attended SOS also in the Valley. So I can make somewhat of a comparison between the two approaches. And I think they're both valid approaches, as well as, you know, I love Deb's Venn chart. It's very informative about what really goes on, how this actually works in people's minds. From my experience, myself, talking to Doug's older brother, who was devastated by it, his younger brother, much less so. But, you know, he and Brian and Doug were very close, 3 years apart and very close. So anyhow, men do have a different journey. I'm not sure the answer is one-on-one conversations. I think that joining these kind of groups for these discussions is just as valid as, you know, joining any other group that, for example, tomorrow night is family support group here in Sholo. And, you know, we're family members again, most of us. Instead of professionals, we're family members. So we've had family members living with these behavioral health disorders for a good part of our adult lives. And so we provide support to each other. It's the same principle, whether you're in a grief share group or whether you go to an SOS group with Impact. I'd like to see Impact be here on the mountain. I was bugging the Taros people about, you know, about that at the CIT conference. You know, I'd like to have two options for people to go to.
Thank you, Ralph.
Now I'm feeling emotional. So
Okay, and it is emotional. And, you know, we all have our own journey. And when it comes to support, one size doesn't fit all, individual for one and a group for another. But I think getting the word out about these groups and is crucial. Any other comments or questions from anybody? Kathy.
I always have to get in there. My grandfather completed suicide, and this was kind of a family norm in a sense, because my father growing up, and then when we were growing up as children, it was always an out for him. He would always use, well, I can always kill myself. And he just kind of held it over our heads. And my father finally did complete suicide about 5 years ago, but he did it on my sister's birthday. And he called her and left a note. But what it did to our family has been very, very disastrous, because there's 3 of us. I have a younger brother, my sister's 16 years younger, and just the dynamics of what happened, our interpretation, it's just left us kind of estranged in a sense. And so, Dana, you know what I'm talking about, because I know you as a family, it was so difficult for you. I remember a lot of those talks we had and the dynamics. Would you care to comment on that?
Sure, and of course, my comments just from my own experience, but as a sibling loss, when you have loss or trauma or difficulties in life, you often will look to your parents or parental figures or someone in your life for guidance and stability. And that was gone. That was completely gone. I didn't have the guidance or the stability from my parents. My parents still can barely function. And you have the loss of the person that's no longer there, but then that entire unit, whatever your unit may look like, whether it's friends or family, can have so many ruptures that come out of that. And so you spend years building on the repair of all of those ruptures, of the people that are still here, but it doesn't feel like they're here. And so you're navigating potentially multiple losses at the same time. And I know for my oldest brother, that loss ultimately broke him. And it really did. He didn't want to go for support. And I think he had a lot of guilt and difficulty in his processing of that. And because we didn't talk about it as a family, and because it was very ruptured, and I think he ultimately felt very alone in his journey. And with the first loss, I was pregnant and very focused on trying to be as okay as I possibly could be to make sure my baby was okay. And so I had that focus and drive, and I don't know what it would have been like otherwise without that focus. But I do think that depending on how families react to this type of loss can really be different if you're able to really lean on each other through this and grow closer. And I saw a lot of that in the groups. A lot of families got a lot closer, and then other ones went a different direction. So I think it's multiple losses, not just the person that's no longer at the table.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just like to mention also that, just a reminder that as loss survivors, we're also at a higher risk of suicide than the general public. And so a good idea for us all to keep an eye on each other and ask those important questions of each other: how we're doing. Do we ever have thoughts of suicide? Do you need help? Do you need to talk? Those kind of questions are really important. Not only have we been through a horrible traumatic event, but there could be a hereditary component in there also. I know depression definitely runs in my family on my father's side. And in my lifetime, we've lost 3 people to suicide. And I would guess if we could go back previous generations, we might see more. It's not unlike heart disease or diabetes, and these illnesses can be passed down. My hope for the future is that we lose the stigma, continue to work on losing the stigma so that people will seek help. And I know that in the 1960s, when my father was struggling, after he came back from the Korean War, he struggled greatly and tried to get help, but there wasn't a lot of help in the 60s. So I know the progress is slow. It has been painfully slow, but I'm hoping that as we continue and lose the stigma, and there's a greater understanding that the brain is part of the body, and the brain can get sick too. And can feel better too with help, especially. Hopefully we're moving in a better direction these days, but just a reminder, keep an eye on each other. My brother and I do that, and it's just kind of always in the back of our mind that we might need a little extra care, a little extra help sometimes. And I remind our support group attendees of that also. Important to remember.
Thank you, Donna. Really good points. Anybody else have something you'd like to bring up?
Hi, my name's Christy Ann. This is my first survivor support group. I'm crying. I just wanted to say, thank you for you guys for sharing. And I think that's why I don't come to these groups, because they're really hard. They just bring up, all that pain and memory. Dana, I'm just like flabbergasted by all that you have done and do. I too lost a brother, and he was my idol. I can't even imagine celebrating. So I just am grateful for your guys' sharing that, and I know that it's important, to talk about these things, and yes, to be available to one another, to hear. And I think the biggest thing for me is being reminded that I'm not alone. There's lots of people out there, who are struggling or who have struggled. And it's as that old saying goes, misery loves company, but that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that, it makes you feel just not so alone, and knowing that people get it, they get it. So I found out about this just through the newsletter that's put out by OIFA or OFIA through Access. I'm in the behavioral health field myself. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say, thank you for sharing. And it's a twisted coin, on the one half I'm grateful, and on the other half I'm like, crap, now I got to zip it back up again, and trudge on. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you.
And thank you for sharing that. And it just drives home the importance of support and being here for each other, and knowing that there is a safety net. And it can take courage to come forward for the support. Any other comments?
This is Kathy again. I noticed that we have Terry Fernelli here with the Yavapai Health Department, I believe. And I know that she experienced some really good programs. One we had at the Justice Coalition, sent out some messages that you belong in this community and we care about you. And I think that sense of belonging to a community is very, very important in reducing suicide. Terry, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Well, hi, everyone. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm also a survivor. My father died by suicide in 1986. I was 29 years old. So it's been a long time, and I only was able to volunteer once with survivors of suicide, but the one person who came really, you could really value, you could really feel, it was important to be there to let them know that you also experienced that and be supportive about what they're going through. As far as being a part of the mental health coalition or the suicide prevention coalition, I've been on that in the coalition for, I don't know, I think it was when John first came and gave his presentation there and then became president or chairperson. Anyway, I this has been something that, you know, in my heart that I like, you know, want to be able to give back and help other people. As far as the county goes, I'm also been part of the Mental Health Coalition of Yavapai, or the Justice and Mental Health Coalition. And they do great work, and it's wonderful to see how the justice system is really looking out for those with mental health issues to get them the help they need versus just, you know, incarcerating them. So that's a really positive thing, and being able to get people the help they need. Other than that, I am retiring. So I have 15 days left, and I'm very excited. And so I am actually retiring on the date of my father's death. I guess it was significant enough in my life that I wanted that to be, I don't know, a beginning and an end, I guess. So seem to have a lot of family deaths around that time anyway. So anyway, thank you so much. And to the 3 people who shared, I know it's tough to share. You know, one of the things that I had the opportunity after my dad's death to go to it was a survivors of suicide type of support group based on, I can't remember the guy who was kind of the guru about that back in the day. And we're talking 86, and how unbelievably powerful it was to be with other people, and how they held you and let you and shared their, you know, it was very powerful. I think I went back one other time, and, you know, and then I moved away from Gainesville. So I was in Florida at the time. Anyway, thank you for this really great event that you've put on for Mental Health Monday.
Thank you, Terry, so much for sharing your experience. And I think that if we went around individually, which we're not going to do, we would find more individuals who would say, I am a survivor of suicide and lost a family member to it. And I want to congratulate you on your retirement.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Ralph, you had your hand up. Oh, wait a minute, George. And then we'll go to George and then Ralph.
I will say that waking up the morning after you try and take your life, it's a bag of mixed feelings. That's all.
Okay, thank you, George. Ralph?
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe we could end on a more positive note than we've all been feeling by examining the future, as someone mentioned about reducing stigma. I think it was Donna Fox. We know that from our Nami work that this problem starts in the teenage years. My son struggled for 30 years before completing his suicide. And one of our programs coming out, you know, the struggle with COVID has been tremendous for us. But one of the programs is End the Silence program. It's targeted at the youth, the schools, the parents, the educators, but mostly it's targeted at the young people themselves, because these teenage years, as their brains are maturing, are very emotional years, and the social media impact on them compared to the bullying that I saw in my school years of junior high is enormous. I don't know how any of them stand it, frankly. They can't go home anymore and get away from it. So the End the Silence program is a program to teach about the warning signs and to break through this idea that don't talk to them about it, don't ask them, or you'll be the cause of them committing suicide, which is so much BS that, you know, it's just, again, part of that stigma that underlies this whole issue for us as a nation and as a community. So there's some hope, I think, for the future. And I also put in the chat a book that I found, being a faith-based person, I found very useful to myself, called Imagine Heaven, John Burke. It's near-death experiences from all over the world.
Thank you, Ralph. And I do want to remind you that we do go to 11:30. So we have plenty of time for more conversation. And I'm wondering, with the COVID pandemic, a lot of people have isolated more, and a lot of people have reached out and gotten into the Zoom experience. And I don't know what groups are live now, what groups are being presented, both live and Zoom simultaneously. But I think it's important to look at how to optimize the availability of the group to more people to be able to attend. Donna?
Yeah, I did put in the chat that if you go to impactsos.org, there are also virtual groups. If there isn't one near you, or if you just prefer to do it on Zoom for whatever reason, there's that option there also with the instructions on how to join a group.
Thank you.
Yeah, Deb.
And Deb?
Yes, I really wanted to speak to Donna's point that she made earlier about keeping an eye on ourselves about about suicide and suicidal, how being affected by one and having it in your family or in your close circle makes one more prone. I think that Joyner's work really helped me to watch for warning signs, because I had just come when I was going back to work and as a case manager, I had been out of work for 2 years because I was unable to leave my house, and I was really I suffer from depression, and so that was quite a bout. And so looking at that diagram, making sure that I could feed those two of those three, because I don't have a fear of dying, but making sure that I was staying balanced in my thought process, I guess, about being alone, and not needed, and also about not being useful. I used tools that I learned in recovery, and in my therapy as well, to do that, and making sure that that when I started kind of ruminating on that I was useless to everybody, that I could sit down and I could write a list, kind of like my gratitude lists were about where I was useful, and challenging those thoughts that I was having. So I really appreciated you bringing that up, Donna, and making sure that we stay well ourselves. I want to share a little bit more about Spark of Life. They are a small group that hold I think they're 3-day workshops, and they're free of charge. I had walked through a friend's loss of her son unexpectedly, and found that and went, oh, that probably would be good for her. And so I accompanied her, and it turned out it was really good for me. But, sometimes, however we get there. But they're an amazing organization, and I'll put their contact information in the chat as well. And I think the second thing is that we can be aware of this. Eliud died with a suicide hotline card in his wallet. This was not something that he hadn't been contemplating, and hadn't been planning for a while. So that the connectedness and the sharing of like experiences is just so impactful and so helpful to battling some of the, that stuff that festers in the dark, that we're not sharing with anyone. So I encourage others to share. And thank you, Nami Yavapai, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Deb. I just want to mention another, another resource available for free to everyone nationally. You can go to the mental health first aid website and look for any classes that are nearby to where you live. And they are offering that, some in person and virtual as well. And that's something that is just another support to help people understand behavioral health issues, what warning signs are, and help to get someone to the resource in your area that would be beneficial to them. Okay, Ralph, you had, I think, your hand up again.
Yeah, had on mute. Yeah, I would second the motion for the mental health first aid. It's a great program, usually a one-day program and fairly widely dispersed across our state. But I would recommend on the subject of suicide that people look into the two major suicide prevention training programs, either Safe Talk, which is usually done in a half-day format, which I took in the Valley some years ago, or QPR, which is a couple of hours and has been done here on the mountain by one of the I guess it was actually Scott, the CEO for the little Colorado Behavioral Health over in neighboring county. Apache was here in Pine Top and did it. So both those programs have the essence of well, I guess the name says it. One has a 4-letter acronym, Safe Talk. Talk is the acronym. It stands for tell, as in telling someone that you're concerned about them, ask whether they are considering suicide. L for, here we go with my short-term memory. And the last one is keep safe. And in the QPR acronym, again, is a question, similar to talk and ask. P, persuade, I think it is, having trouble with the middle of these acronyms, and R is refer. So they're both good trainings and fairly simple to accomplish in communities. And there's something to keep in the toolkit as we meander through the world of mental health. Look them up.
Some of us belong to the behavioral health community in the sense that we're peers, and suicide is very, very common. We've all lost friends. And to make it even more a bit difficult is that we have reached places in society where we're respected, and we don't want to openly share when we have suicidal thoughts. It would be very hard for me to go to a support group, and we have what we call peer supports to reach out, or my friends like Candy and Lori and Deb, that I reach out to constantly. But there is that sense of shame and fear, especially if you have that label as being mentally ill, and then you have these little thoughts. It's a great deal of fear. So many of us don't like the word clinical. We don't like the concept of therapists. We're not about to reach out again because we've been deceived and lost, so many times. So I would like to just share what I do. I live in the middle of the national forest. I live up in Cherry, Arizona, up on Mingus Mountain. And what I do every day is, it's just very simple, and it's all very selfish, but I go into the valley and I try to reach out to other people, like the checkout lady. I try to just say, how are you doing? You know, are you feeling okay? Whatever. But I just constantly try to reach out and be nice to other people. And this is for myself and for them. But if we each, you know, left today and just made a choice to reach out and be nice to people, instead of those people that run you over in the car and flip them off, you know, you're nice to them. It helps change my feelings about myself. And you never know if you have made a difference in someone's life. And I know that you all will, because when someone's nice to me, I remember that. So, you know, I think if we can't leave here with just one thing, it's that we simply, as individuals, can make a difference in someone else's life.
Okay, and we have time for Dana. You had your hand up?
I was just going to note, and sorry, this is going backwards a little bit, but just as far as the safe talk, there's also assist, which is a little bit more deep and in depth. And something that I did as part of my journey was I took that back to the workplace, and I asked that we make that training available for anyone that wanted it. So any and all staff at my workplace, if they want mental health first aid or if they want safe talk, we have trainers in-house now. And so I think part of that is what we can do to carry on losing stigma and increasing awareness and ability to help people. And so, you know, safe talk is kind of like the referral, how to do that appropriate referral, and assist is more hands-on handling. That's just the simple way of putting it. But, you know, encourage those around you to take those courses, take a small bite out of their day or their week to be able to be better equipped for all of those conversations, because you can have the great, hi, how are you? I'm going to be very kind to you, but there are times that you're going to run into someone that's not feeling good and they may let you know. And it may be a complete stranger, and you can be so pivotal in their life by your ability to handle that. And so really making sure that we also advocate for people to get those tools to be able to be of service to one another.
Absolutely, thank you. We're going to wrap up or lead into wrap up soon here. George briefly, and then John.
That's an oxymoron, George and briefly. Thank you. I simply wanted to concur with Kathy that being compassionate to others, and what Dana was saying, also being compassionate when someone is yelling at you, it makes a big difference in how I feel.
Thank you, George. And John?
My little button wasn't working, sorry. Thank you. Just another quick comment. It's kind of taken the direction a little bit different place, but suicide prevention is so very, very important. And one of the things that always struck me when I was like chairman of the coalition was that the question is always why. People ask me, why do people die by suicide? And so that's looking at what I call upstream causation. So I have trying to been focusing my advocacy efforts on that aspect of prevention, in addition to knowing what the warning signs are, who's at risk, getting them to resources, all that stuff that we've just been talking about. And I was wondering if I might be able to try and share something I found on Facebook here. Okay, this is, can you hear me still?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, this is just a little slide that I found on Facebook not too long ago, and it just really hit that nail on the head for me in terms of upstream prevention. What we've been talking about is really what's in the upper part of this little slide about suicide prevention is. Getting them to a resource. In this case, it just happens to be the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. There's many of those kinds of resources, both local, state, and regional or national. But what suicide prevention really is, from an upstream viewpoint, is that whole long list of things there. And I think the bottom is cut off. I apologize for that, but it's right at the bottom. No, they're all there. And there's probably many more things that could be added to that list in terms of upstream prevention.
Thank you, John, and anybody who has a camera on their phone, you can take a quick picture of that.
It's on Facebook, Nami Yavapai, and I believe it's on the mental health resource Facebook as well.
That may be where I found it.
Okay.
Yeah, because you are our friend. Thank
All
you.
right, and thank you so much, and it, that's a great way to wrap up the conversation on this. Again, I want to thank everyone, our presenters, everyone who took time to be here,
And that's it, unless Kathy, you have any?
I keep seeing George. Many of us have known George for 20 years, including Dana and Deb. And George, you did a fantastic job today. And, George has really become a true advocate. So I just, anyway, thank everyone for participating. Lori, you want to say goodbye?
yeah, and I just want to thank Rose, who is
Oh, yeah, Rose,
here in
Rose.
the office with us at Candy's, for co-facilitating with us and being the strong part of this team that puts this on.
Thank you, guys. You were fantastic. Let's keep up the good work.